Everyone is a star child, made of stardust and the infinite potential of the universe. This extraordinary fearless something in each of us clamors for freedom from the bonds of fear, conformity, and an ordinary life. Welcome to Dr. Durr's Living in the Sweet Spot, where practical tools and solutions from the intersection of mind-body medicine, science, and spiritual well-being awaken and empower you to live out your infinite potential, to live life in the sweet spot. Millions of Americans suffer from depression and anxiety. And the literature also shows that around 70% of people have also experienced some type of trauma. And of course, this too can lead to depression and anxiety. So today I'm going to have a conversation with my guest, Dr. Michael Hoskins, and we're going to talk about how one can pedal to peace, mental healing through mindful cycling. We're going to explore a powerful connection between cycling, mindfulness, and mental health. So welcome, Dr. Michael Hoskins. How you doing today?
Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm doing well. I'm excited to talk with you today.
Well, I'm excited to talk with you too today because you're using an approach that, while exercise is talked about, obviously it's the research supports how helpful exercise can be. As a matter of fact, in mild to moderate depression, exercise is as effective as medication. So while that information is out there and available, it's not something that I hear people really talking about. And the fact of the matter is, at least a third of people don't respond to medications. So that means that we still got a lot of people who are suffering with untreated depression and anxiety.
Yes.
And for those who may not have had, I think that both the honor and the pleasure of knowing who you are and having heard your story and your accomplishments, Dr. Michael Hoskins has taught at Indiana University in Bloomington, where he also earned his Ph.D. in biology, and Davidson, a top 10 National Liberal Arts college. Dr. Michael has studied exercise and the brain with John Ratey, MD of Harvard University Medical School, and author of the book Spark, The Revolutionary Science of Exercise and the Brain. He lectures on how physical exercise can promote mental health through neurogenesis, which is creating new cells, and the reduction of the stress response. Dr. Michael currently serves on the Program Advisory Board of the John W. Brick Mental Health Foundation, an organization dedicated to reimagining our understanding of how we approach mental health challenges with the focus on the role of mind-body practices and exercise. And he also serves as an advisor to the Well-Being Think Tank.
Yes.
So Dr. Michael, so for all those folks who may not be aware of, I think, how much of a heavyweight you are with that big brain that you have, how did you get started on this?
Well, I was one of those people who was taking antidepressant medications and it wasn't working. In fact, I took every known possible antidepressant medication in every possible combination. But on top of that, I was taking anti-anxiety drugs. And then my psychiatrist suggested I take one of those atypical antipsychotics that they're using now on top of antidepressants, and none of them were working. And we did various combinations for a couple of years. and nothing was working. And my psychiatrist one day told me that nothing's working, Michael, and I've never seen anything like this. I don't know what to do for you, and I think I'll put you on lithium. And at the time, the idea of being on lithium really scared me. It shouldn't have, I don't think, but it did. And I remember coming home that day, sitting on my couch, wondering what I could possibly do for myself. Now, at that time, I had already spent a year and a half, 2 years going through these different medications, going to therapy, not working because I had to quit my job because of my depression and my PTSD. So that was a real difficult moment for me when I thought, what is my life about? Do I have any value? And that's a tough place to be because, I taught at some really good colleges. I'm pretty good at teaching. I really enjoyed teaching. I've done some other interesting things in my life. And at that moment, I could not really function very well at all. And therefore, I decided I needed to do one of three things that used to make me happy. I hadn't done them in a couple of years at that time. But the three things that made me happy, still do, were listening to records on my stereo, playing my guitar, and riding my bike. And I hadn't done any of those in 3 years or 2 years. And so that day, I decided I'm going to ride my bike. Let's see how that does. That used to make me happy. Let's see how that does. But as you know, and probably some of your listeners know, when you have really serious depression, the idea of doing something like a bike ride, which involves getting all your gear together, putting air in the tire, and going out in the world, that was a lot for me. It was too much for me. So I decided I would do small steps. I'd find my cycling clothes, my jersey, my shorts. I'd find my shoes. I'd find my helmet. And I did this over a period of 7 days. And then the only thing left to do was to put air in the tires. And so I did. Put air in my tires. And then I thought, well, I might as well go for a bike ride.
And I'm just so you know, the reason I'm laughing because I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, is that really just such a metaphor for life, right? Just put some air in, let me put some air in the tires.
I love it. I love that. I love the idea of me standing there going, well, I've got all my gear together. You need to put air in the tires. So I did. And I used to be a competitive bike racer. I used to ride many, many dozens of miles a day for many years. But that day I went out for a 4-mile bike ride. And that was 2 miles out. And I turned around and I came back. 4 miles. That is nothing. For your listeners that are competitive riders, that's nothing. It's not even time to warm up. But I remember at the end of that, I felt better.
Mm-hmm.
I remember thinking, gosh, I feel better about myself. I think I'll try this again the next day. And I did. And then the next. And I started adding miles. And pretty soon I was doing 20 miles a day and feeling pretty good. And that's when I went to my psychiatrist and I said to her, I'm not going to take these medicines anymore. I'm feeling better. I'm riding my bike. I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to try and figure it out. And so in answer to your question, that was what prompted me to get interested in this. I just dove into the medical literature to try and find out what was going on. And the connection was exercise and depression. That's what I was researching. And I started to discover a whole new world that I previously didn't know about.
So you one of the things too that I think about too is as you were sharing your story, but I know that there was a part of it, um, and I'm asking you about this because I know you shared it publicly before,
Mm-hmm.
that I think is really meaningful. Is and you mentioned it a little bit, but basically the fact that you also things your depression and you had also experienced trauma um, was so severe that it led to I think I think I've heard you call it before all hell breaking loose or all heck breaking loose. And if you would share that part of your story, because I think a lot of the reasons that people kind of don't talk about what's going on with them in terms of their mental health and the depression and anxiety or their trauma is because they tend to think that they're by themselves.
Mm.
It's and no maybe nobody else is experiencing what I'm experiencing. Or they also think that sometimes when you see people, you know, like yourself or like myself who have um, have a are highly educated, have successful careers, there may be a tendency to think that we don't experience
Yeah.
depression or anxiety. And I know I've shared with people before the fact that I suffered severe physical abuse around money. I also experienced sexual assault in my 20s. So folks might look at me and they think everything is fine and wonderful, but I've had my bouts of depression also. So
Yeah. No, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about that, because I think it's important, and I think it's important in general that we talk more about mental health matters.
yeah.
I know that for people struggling with depression or PTSD, particularly those who have been abused, the shame can sometimes overcome the willingness to talk about it. And that shame is externally placed. It's not ours to own. So, yeah, as a kid, I was sexually assaulted as a very, very young child, 5 years old. And then
So
as a,
sorry, so hard that happened to you. So sorry that happened to you.
yes, thank you. And then when I was in grade school, uh, I was abused by a priest that worked in my school. And then I don't think I've shared this with you. I was sexually assaulted as a graduate student
Oh wow.
when I was unconscious. And so I've had some, as you could probably classify it, some trauma in
Hmm.
my life. And for many, many, many years, I didn't think about any of these things. And I didn't have to really experience, I didn't think I was experiencing any repercussions from any of this. I felt like I was going along in life pretty well
Hmm.
until 2008 or so.
And what happened then in 2008?
It was in the context of a relationship ending. It was in the context of attachment trauma, and of
Mm-hmm.
course, the connection, the physical connection, which was a dangerous place for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Being suddenly severed in ways that are not healthy, and I just found myself absolutely out of sorts, completely out of sorts, and I simply couldn't function. And I had never experienced this in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not know what was going on. I didn't know what depression was at that point in my life. I certainly didn't know what PTSD was in that moment. I thought it was for war veterans. I thought it was for war veterans. And I, at that point, started seeing a therapist for the first time. I started seeing my psychiatrist for the first time and started learning about depression and PTSD. And as I've said many places, my family came and had an intervention for me to have me go to a psychiatric hospital in Arizona. That I if you've seen these TV shows or these kinds of interventions, I was resistant to it for about a half an hour, and then finally I gave in. And I just said, okay, fine, let's go. So I went, and I ended up in fact spending 30 days at a hospital in Arizona. Now it was not a horrible place. It's actually quite beautiful place. It's in the desert north of Tucson,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a well-known place. It's
Mm-hmm.
where Hollywood people go when they are recovering from addiction issues or just stress and trauma, depression issues. So it's a very nice place, but it's a hospital nonetheless, and you couldn't leave. Like, there's no leaving.
Well, there's no leaving if they think that you're not safe, right? But yeah, obviously, yeah, psychiatric hospitals are a locked unit because they don't want you to harm yourself or somebody else if you haven't been stabilized yet, right?
Yeah,
Um,
and I was not stable. I was not stable. In fact, I was incredibly out of it. And the first 5 days there, I don't remember. I just don't remember. I couldn't make day from night, up from down, and I was kept in the intake part of the hospital for 5-6 days, when normally it's 1 or 2 days and you're up into the normal residential areas. And in fact, a week after I was there, the medical staff had a meeting about me.
Mm-hmm.
And they had decided that I was too far gone for this level of care,
Mm.
and that they were going to send me to Los Angeles to a more, you would know the word for it, I don't know what the word for it is, but a more intensive care situation. And I'll never forget that day. Can you imagine? You're at a psychiatric hospital and they tell you you're too far gone for our hospital. And I remember I told them, give me 12 hours. Give me 12 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And that afternoon, we had a particular group therapy called psychodrama.
Mm.
And people like me who are new to the hospital played supporting roles in this drama of somebody's life. It's a very powerful therapeutic process.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone in our group had to play a role, which meant I had to speak and I had to engage. And I did. I dug deep and I engaged and I took part in it. And they had a meeting again and said, you can stay. That was a major turning point for me. But yeah, this is related to childhood sexual abuse. And I just want to say, there are tens and tens of thousands of us guys in the United States of America who were sexually abused by priests. It is a major, major issue, especially for people my age or a little bit younger who were abused in the 70s, 80s, or even late 60s. So this is one of the reasons why I talk about this. I think it's important to talk about. I think it's important to destigmatize mental health problems. I think it's important to show people who are relatively normal functioning who have dealt with these and can go on and try and do other things in their lives.
Yeah, and one, thank you so very much for, you know, that level of vulnerability that you're sharing, that, you know, your story with me and with my audience. I because I know it's not always easy to do. The thing that one I want to acknowledge is, one, I think that it's, while obviously if you're the person in need of help, that the part that can be scary is when somebody tells you that they can't help you. I think what's important to, in terms of reframing that, is not to say, oh, this is how bad and terrible I am that they can't help me, but to maybe see it from a place of, they're acknowledging the limits of their skill set, right? Not everybody can do the same kinds of heart surgery, even amongst heart surgeons, right? Not everybody has the same tools and skill set in every medical specialty. So I think an important way to reframe that again is to say, they're just honestly telling me that this is beyond the limits of my skills and tools.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way to reframe that. Yeah, and that voice saying that I'm too far gone, that was the shame-based voice, right, of the Depression era. Yeah, exactly right. Beautiful reframing.
Yes. So, and then the other thing too, I think it's important for people to understand is when children experience abuse when they're very young, one of the difficulties for that is because, as you well know, even as adults, we struggle with having the proper tools to navigate trauma and healing and adversity. So imagine when you take a very young child who is now having this experience, and they may probably lack the language, right, to explain what they're experiencing. They also have a lot of fear about telling somebody for various reasons. The person may hurt me, the person may hurt my family, the person may um, just whatever harmful things that they might do. But there's also the fact that I think it's important for people to understand is that when you're talking about a young brain, right, of a young child, that brain is in the process of growing and evolving and building new circuitry. So even and growing at a much faster rate than the adult brain is creating new brain cells. So when you add in one, the trauma that how it causes the wiring and firing of certain brain cells together, because of that trauma. But then you also add in the growth and the new circuits and cells that are being generated anyway. So that's even more difficult and kind of more damaging for a young child. And of course, the studies that they've done over the last few years in terms of that research coming out, which is adverse child events, and so how harmful that is, because really not only is it shaping the brain cells, but it's also impacting the DNA and how that's expressed, i.e. in the cells. And then that trauma is actually passed on generationally once that child becomes an adult, and if they have children, then that trauma actually gets passed on through their DNA, and the studies show that. So that's something I think it's important for people to understand, just how impactful trauma is, especially to a young child.
Yes. Yes.
Your doctor saying to you that the psychiatrist, once you were discharged, stabilized and discharged, and your doctor again saying to you that they weren't sure how to help you. And um, what I'd like to do is to get into that some more, but let's take a break, and after we come back, we'll pick that up.
Sounds great.
Heaven abounds in you, enlightens, uplifts, inspires, and invites you to live a life that's engaged, joyous, and limitless, the sweet spot of life. Take this journey in oneness. We are and have all that God, the infinite creative source of the universe, is. You are infinite potentiality, and the kingdom of heaven is within you. Heaven abounds in you. Dr. Balin Ader here with my special guest, Dr. Michael Hoskins. And we again are talking about pedal to peace, mental healing through mindful cycling. So before the break, we were talking about the fact that you reached a point with your psychiatrist where she said to you that she wasn't able to help you. She hadn't seen this before, and so was that the point when all heck broke loose?
Yeah, that was the kind that all heck broke loose about 2 years before that, and that was when the landslide had all hit the bottom of the hill,
Okay.
and I'm lying in the rubble, going.
Wow.
So I hadn't worked for 2 years at that point. I'd quit a very very high level job, and I literally had laid in bed for 2 years and gone to my therapist and gone to my psychiatrist for 2 years. That's all I did, and so that all hell had broken loose when the depression PTSD hit, and that was kind of the moment when something had to change for me, and that's when I did my bike ride.
Yeah. So because you mentioned about how you slowly um, started preparing yourself to take the ride,
Yeah.
and when you finally did, and over time you felt yourself feeling better and better, every day after each ride. So did you know how that was helping your brain, or why did you decide to do that?
I decided to do that because only three things in my life had ever brought me happiness at that moment. I could think of only three things in my life that brought me happiness, and I hadn't done any of them in a couple of years. And as a former bike racer and a person who used to love riding, I thought I got to try one of these three things, and bicycling is one of them. I'm going to try that. As you mentioned, I went out and just started to ride daily and feel better. But I didn't know why. I had no idea why. I was surprised as my psychiatrist at how the writing was making me feel better, to the point where I didn't want to take the medicines anymore. And she couldn't believe that. In fact, her eyes got very wide. And she told me, I would not recommend, Michael, you stop taking these medications. And I told her, I'm going to stop. I don't know. I'm feeling better, but I'll figure it out.
So were the medications helping you at all, though?
Not measurably. I mean, one could argue that they kept me from getting worse. There's always that possibility. But she could not detect any real improvement in my depression and my PTSD symptoms.
Okay, because from the way you're describing it, it sounds like that it basically sounds like that your depression anxiety remained very severe despite the fact that you're taking medications.
Correct.
I mean, the reality is, and if you're not able to work because you're saying you quit, uh, uh, you quit your job, which for you would have been a high functioning position, and you're on your couch for 2 years, despite the fact that you're taking medication and therapy, that to me sounds like it's not working.
Mm-hmm. And it wasn't.
So once you found yourself feeling better with the cycling, what prompted you to start doing the research into why this is working?
Well, I'm a biologist, and I just could not imagine what was going on here, but I was interested in trying to figure it out. And so I just started with simple Google searches on exercise and depression. And I started to discover this entire field of research that I knew nothing about. And it was profoundly biological research. And it had to do with changes in the brain. It had to do with exercise and how it can promote these changes in the brain. And at this time, 2008 or so, there were already published papers on exercise helping to treat depression. And I had not known about any of this. And I found it very, very exciting, both as a person who had experienced depression and PTSD,
Mhm.
but also as a biologist.
And what was the research showing?
The research was showing, well, there's two sides to this. One is that the vertebrate brain, or the human brain, if you want to talk about us, can grow new neurons.
Uh-huh.
And as a biology student in graduate school, that was just unheard of. We just could not say that there's new nerve growth within brains. The only thing we can do with a developed brain is make it worse, right? Through drug use or injury or just lack of use. And so the paradigm was that your brain is basically fixed. You can maybe strengthen some connections between neurons, or some others might weaken over time. But generally speaking, you have a certain number of brain cells, and all you can do is destroy them. And I know for a fact that in my biology department at Indiana University, no one was talking about new nerve cells in brains.
Mm-hmm.
But yet here I am reading in 2008 about new nerve cell growth in vertebrate brains. So it was an absolute revelation to me. And then I'm also reading that aerobic exercise in particular can actually boost the growth of new neurons in the brain. And then I would say the third part is this growth happens mostly in this part of the brain called the hippocampus. And hippocampus is kind of the home of depression. And
Well, it's also the kind of the home of PTSD as well,
along
right?
with
Because the hippocampus is where we have memories, but memories that are associated with certain experiences. So particularly in PTSD, it's the memory of this threat happening to me, so that I'm on the lookout for it and can avoid it the next time, so that I don't get hurt.
Yep. 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 So I saw these three things. One, new neural growth in the brain. Exercise promotes that neural growth. And it happens in parts of the brain that are related to depression and PTSD. And I thought, holy moly, this is amazing. And look at me. I'm now riding 20 miles a day, and I quit my antidepressant medications. like, this is really profoundly important. This is really important stuff. And I was thinking, we need to tell the world about this.
So, were you finding anything in the literature about increased blood flow or the increased production of, the brain chemicals and neurotransmitters that help us feel better? Serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. Were you finding anything like that?
Yes, there was a lot of discussion about maybe in terms of exercise helping depression, blood flow alone could account for just increased blood flow, increased nutrients, removing waste products, that kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then most definitely there was talk about increase in these neurotransmitters. Yes, like serotonin or norepinephrine, like you mentioned. Absolutely, I was reading about that too. And those were interesting to me. They're still interesting to me.
Right.
But
So to summarize, we got increase in growth of brain cells. We got improvement in blood flow, which is going to bring oxygen, but also it's going to bring the nutrients that the brain needs. Then it's also going to take away the toxins that may harm the brain, and it's going to increase the production of those brain chemicals that help us feel better, that help us be more motivated. And the other thing too, and I don't know, you didn't mention this, but obviously the other thing that exercise does, right, is that it helps the body make more endorphins, which is our body's own natural painkiller, i.e., our own natural opiate.
indeed. And yes, indeed. And I love the origin. I tell people this all the time. The origin of the word endorphin is from endogenous morphine and morphine, endorphins.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, and don't forget, by the way, endocannabinoids.
Yes. Which is a whole nother conversation for us to have, right? Because those receptors are like all over the body.
Yeah. Any drug that works on us,
Hmm.
any drug that works on us that we take exogenously already has receptors in the body for it, which therefore means our bodies already make a chemical or some kind of compound or component that will bind already to those receptors. In other words, drugs that work on us, we typically will make ourselves. Probably not all. You're the medical doctor and I'm not, but mostly that's true.
Okay. So did you find anything else in the literature that was saying what the benefits are in terms of exercise and depression or anxiety?
Well, later, yeah, and later in my work with the John Burke Mental Health Foundation has solidified it. To me, there are three main forms of mental health benefit from exercise. And this is something the John W. Burke Foundation talks about. One is the building of self-efficacy, or the ability to tackle difficult things on your own, and the belief in the self that allows you to do that.
Yes, that belief that I am capable
I
of
can
making
do
it
hard
happen,
things.
of getting it done.
Yes. So exercise helps you build that self-efficacy, which is profoundly good for your mental health. Um, Very often we exercise in social environments. So the social interaction is very good for mental health. And then there's the biological, physiological mechanisms that boost health in the brain through neurogenesis, or maybe boosting some of these other compounds or chemicals. So I think about it in three ways: self-efficacy, social factors, and then the biological, physiological factors.
Okay. So how did this research that you discover, how did it contribute to you starting your company, Revocycle?
So after a couple months of writing and reading the research literature, I stumbled across a book by a guy from Harvard Medical School. It's one I know you know. For your listeners, it's called Spark, The Revolutionary Science of Exercise in the Brain, and it's written by a guy named John Rady from Harvard Medical School. And that book was written in 2009 or 10. I don't remember the exact year. And I think it's the first book that captured much of this science for the popular audience rather than research literature. So John gathered together all this research and wrote a book promoting exercise as a way of benefiting brain health and also mental health. And so I stumbled upon that book, bought it, read it, Then I called Harvard and said, hey, I would like to study with this guy. Does he have any continuing medical education classes anywhere? And they said, yeah, he's doing one in the next couple months at Esalen in Big Sur, California.
Mhm.
And you're welcome to come join them if you would like. And so I did. I went and I spent a week with John Rady studying the science of exercise in the brain at one of the most beautiful places on the planet, which is Big Sur and Esalen in Big Sur. And then at the end of that week, I was sitting there thinking, wow, exercise has profoundly affected me. It has allowed me to stop taking all these medications. I've learned about all this amazing science. And I cannot think of anything in the fitness world that even talks about this. No one was talking about exercise and mental health, exercise for the brain. So sitting on the cliffs of Big Sur overlooking the Pacific Ocean, I decided I was going to create a fitness brand. And that fitness brand would be indoor cycling, group cycling, and it would be focused on exercise for mental health, exercise for brain health, exercise for holistic well-being. And so I just came up with the concept for my brand sitting there over the Pacific Ocean. At that time, there were spin classes in gyms, right? Johnny G and his famous spin program, but there were no standalone studios for indoor cycling, group cycling. It was Soul Cycle, the one everyone knows, had yet to be created.
Okay.
And so I'm thinking, I'm going to make a physical fitness studio. I'm going to call it Revocycle Mind and Body Cycling to promote the connection between those two, which I think is very often disconnected in fitness. And I'm going to teach people how to exercise mindfully for mental health and holistic well-being. All of that was absolutely crazy in 2012 or 2013.
One of the things I wondered too is with you cycling, what percentage would you say that you felt better, or that the depression and anxiety and the PTSD lessened with you doing cycling?
90%.
That's huge.
I quit all the medicines I was taking.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, we're talking about a multi-drug cocktail of antidepressants, anxiolytics, and atypical antipsychotics, which, as you know, and your listeners may not know this, they're often used as an adjunct to the antidepressants. I stopped all of them,
Mm-hmm.
and I felt good. I would say 90%, maybe 100%. I felt good. I felt positive. I felt like I had purpose in my life. Now, there's a lot of interconnected factors here, right? But the fact is, I was on some pretty strong drugs, and I stopped them completely. And it was when I started cycling that I started feeling better.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that's important for people to recognize is the fact that while some folks absolutely benefit from and need psychiatric medications in order to balance some of the chemicals in their brains, but that's not true for everybody. So in part, again, what you were talking about in terms of the cycling of the exercise is it's going to increase the blood flow. It's going to increase the production of neurotransmitters, but we also need to look at our nutrition to give our brain what it needs.
Yep.
So what I want to do is I definitely want to get into your unique approach to cycling and exercise, and combined with mindfulness, because as you were saying before, nobody was doing this at the time when you started it. So let's take a break, and when we come back, then let's talk about that.
Sounds good.
Heaven Abounds in You takes you on an inward journey of discovery that dramatically transforms your outward experience of life. Discover the power of belief. Utilize it in connection with science to create a vision of meaning and purpose that pulls you forward. Let go of the meager me to discover the magnificent me. Let go of your painful past and live life free from fear, worry, and stagnation. Experience an abundant universe as you powerfully create happiness, relationships, health, and limitless opportunities. When you heal your mind, all things are possible. Dr. Balin A. Durr here with my special guest, Dr. Michael Hoskins, and we're talking about pedal to peace, mental healing through mindful cycling. So before the break, Dr. Michael, you were going to tell us how Revocycling um, combines a unique approach to our mental healing and to our mental health and mental well-being. So tell us about that.
Well, let me start by saying, although I have been an athlete my entire life and I've lifted weights and worked out in gyms since I was 15 years old, I've never been a fitness person. And by that, I mean, I'm an athlete and I exercised and I worked out in the gym in order to become a better athlete. But that's not fitness. And I didn't know this at the time. So for you listeners, fitness is a culture. Fitness is a very particular culture. And by that, I mean they have certain beliefs, certain values, certain practices. Certain individuals are elevated within that culture to be leaders because they're very good at those things. And I was not part of that. I've never been part of that. And I was creating a business within an industry that I did not fully understand.
Mm.
And so in creating Revocycle Mind and Body Cycling and doing a 5-year lease on a studio and buying, $50,000 worth of bikes and a $4,000 sound system, I found myself going, what have you done? Because I realized then fitness people did not get what I was saying.
And what were you saying?
I was saying, forget about weight loss.
Mm-hmm.
I was saying, don't worry about changing your body. I was saying, use your exercise as a moving meditation. I was saying, be present in the body as it's moving. I was saying, you don't need me to motivate you. I don't want that job. I want to teach you to find that motivation within. I was saying, we're not going to yell and we're not going to scream in class. We're going to treat this cycling as a yoga class. Mindful, peaceful, calming, soft voice, tune into the body. All of that was just very strange to people, and they didn't know what to make of it. And so here I am, just signed a 5-year lease, bought $50,000 worth of bikes, and people don't get what I'm saying. And I had a choice.
You're like, no boot camp.
Yeah. And I had a choice, and the choice was, all right, do we start yelling and screaming and using foul language sometimes and pounding people with 120 decibel dance music? Or do I just say, okay, let's start to teach people about this? And I chose the latter, and I'm glad I did. But at the time.
So what about your approach combining cycling with mindfulness? What does that look like?
Well, I tell people that it looks like a yoga class.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like a yoga class,
Mm-hmm.
but you're on a bike.
Okay.
And you're pedaling at different speeds. You're pedaling with different resistances. You're climbing, you're resting, but you're always within. You're always tuning into the body. You're using the breath. You're using the sensation of the muscles to quiet the mind. You're noticing your worried thoughts about the future or the past, and you're trying to let them go time and time and time again. It's very much
so. So, Dr. Michael, for those who may not understand, why is it important to tune into the body?
Well, the body becomes a place for us to focus, as the Buddhists call it, the monkey mind.
Mm-hmm. Dukkha.
Sorry?
Dukkha.
Mm-hmm. And the reason is, of course, that we spend most of our lives worried about the future or regretting the past. We're almost never in the present. Those thoughts are almost always stressful. And if we can become present in the moment through paying attention to the body and the breath, time and time and time and time again, we can reduce stress. We can reduce those thoughts and become happier and more mentally healthy. And that's why, as they do in yoga, tune into the body. Thich Nhat Hanh, right? The famous Buddhist monk, taught about walking meditation.
Yes. And you know what, before I definitely want to get into that, but the one I want to point something out, which
Yeah.
is the other thing too, what you're suggesting is really because most of the time we tend to live in our heads. And I've heard various people, including Anne Lamott, say, uh, that's a dangerous place. I don't go there by myself at night. That's what she said. And Iyanla Vanzant says, don't don't go there without don't go to your mind like that without adult supervision. So the
Yes.
point is that the mind thinks, and sometimes the stuff is crazy as hell, but it's also can be a very dangerous place for us to go to, especially if we don't know how to manage our thinking. So the mind is about thinking, but the body is about feeling. The mind doesn't feel per se, but the body does,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So the point is, and when you're saying about centering yourself in the moment, it's also to pull ourselves out of what we're thinking and to sense what we're feeling, to sense where the body is in space.
Yes.
And so what it does is to help us connect to ourselves, because
Yes.
when we spend too much time with our thinking, if it's distorted or just off off center, or just it's not in keeping with reality, then we lose ourselves in that. I call it being lost in the weeds, instead of, and so we disconnect from ourselves. So that centering ourselves in the body helps to make it personal, helps me to reconnect to myself. So of course you were about to, bring up the Vietnamese master Thich
Yeah.
Nhat Hanh in
Yeah.
talking about walking meditations.
Yes. And this is the third. This is the third leg of my brand and my program, and I haven't mentioned this yet. But also during this time when I was recovering, I was going to a spiritual center here in Portland, and it was a spiritual community where people lived for decades and practiced yoga, and they had their teacher there, and they'd go to lessons, but twice a week they'd let the general public in to come and practice yoga with them or do some meditation or some chanting, and I would go, and I was looking for meaning, I was looking for purpose, I was trying to feel better, and that got me deeply.
You were looking for connection to yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And that then became another branch of this for me. I started reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I started reading the Dalai Lama's writings. I started reading Thich Nhat Hanh. And that Thich Nhat Hanh's talking about the moving meditation and the walking for him,
Yes.
right? And the
Right.
setting.
He says, but whether it's drinking a cup of tea, whether it's, walking, or I like to say, or if you're washing a dish,
Washing the dishes.
the the importance of it is not only does it reconnect me to myself, but it reconnects me to the experience of the moment,
Yes.
and in experiencing the moment, what's happening in the moment. Then number one, I'm not living out of the memories of my past. I'm not living out of my fears and anxiety about the future, but I'm also therefore then connected to the absolute beauty and wonder and awe that is present right now,
Oof.
even in the simple activity of taking a step. And he says, of course, in taking the step, it brings us into the now, right? And in the now is where we can take action. But in the now, then I can also be appreciative of what I have. And in appreciating what I have, I can then make use of what I have in order to create my dreams and my desires. And again, to recognize the unique, wonderful allness that each of us are in this physical body.
Absolutely perfect. Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now is
Mhm.
about this. And meditation is a way of getting that. Moving meditation is a way of doing that. Drinking your tea with reverence, washing your dishes. These are all ways of doing that. Yes. And I was profoundly moved by this. And I realized my cycling is a meditation.
Yes.
I'm
So,
in the moment.
so in this last minute or so, how does that work in cycling? Sh- ex- yeah, share that with us, please.
Well, cycling outdoors and indoors, they differ in one fundamental respect. Outdoors, these eyes have to be paying attention to cars, trucks, glass, screws, boxes in the path of me. I have to constantly be alert, and I'm constantly scanning the environment for cars behind, cars to the side. It can be dangerous, and so that alone keeps you highly focused riding outdoors, and therefore you're in the moment. The power of now. Indoor cycling, you don't have to worry about those things.
Hmm.
So it takes a little more work to get into the moment, and so we have to tune in even more to the body. It's posture in space, the sensation of the muscles working. What's your breath? From where are you breathing? What are your shoulders doing? Where's your neck? All those cues, like you would find in yoga, are extremely useful in an indoor cycling environment, because otherwise we could just kind of drift off into the mind wandering excessively.
So then, how does that help improve depression and anxiety?
Well, you know,
Yeah, how does that help? How does that help heal? Uh, the heal the mind and heal the brain of those mental illnesses and trauma.
well, the way I look at it is the mindfulness itself, not the aerobic exercise that's accompanied
Mhm.
it in our cycling classes, but the mindfulness itself allows you to not have those stressful thoughts about the future and the past. And when you reduce the stress response, you reduce the secretion of these glucocorticoids and inflammation. And therefore, you boost your physical health. But because you're not worried about the past or the future, your mental health can benefit too. And I think about, the default mode network, and how when we're just sitting around daydreaming, these ruminative thoughts come in, right? And we get caught up in them. And we can start to notice that they just daisy chain one stressful thought to the next. And I find that the mindfulness to the body awareness in meditative indoor cycling allows us to not get caught up in those ruminative thoughts, which have downstream mental health problems for us.
So you know what, Dr. Michael, I could just talk to you about this probably for hours, frankly, but um, we are out of time. So I absolutely want you to come back and so we can get into this some more because this I think this is offers so much help and healing to people. But how can people reach you
Well, I tell people these
and
days,
take a class with you?
I tell people, find me on LinkedIn. And that's where I do a lot of my writing and connecting with people who have a similar mindset. I'm on a mission. I'm on a mission to spread the word of exercise for brain health, mental health. And then also, I teach weekly classes on a platform called recess.tv. And I do online cycling classes through that platform a few times a week. And you can find me on that and schedule a class if you'd like to come.
Well, thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
being
Thank
with
you.
me today. I encourage every folks to actually, to connect with you in terms of your classes, especially if you're in need of mental health healing and And again, we'll have you come back.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to be here today.
I'm Dr. Valen A. Durr, awakening and empowering you to live out your infinite potential, to live life in a sweet spot. I'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us today in the sweet spot. Share, follow, and like us on social media. To learn more, please visit balinadurmd.com, spelled BALINADURRMD.com. Join us next week, and remember, when you heal your mind, all things are possible.